Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Now We're Really Talking, the podcast where we slow down and dive deep into the real, very human stories behind mental health. Today I'm joined by someone whose journey is layered, brave and honest. Lara Rodwell is a writer, journalist and mental health advocate whose work explores neurodivergence, grief, identity and loneliness. She speaks openly about growing up as an identical twin, navigating her sister's eating disorder, discovering she is autistic and ADHD in adulthood, and how these revelations reshaped her understanding of herself. Lara also shares a deeply personal experience of losing her dad in 2020 and how grief became both a rupture and the start of a new chapter. Before we get into the conversation, a quick content warning. In this episode, we discuss eating disorders, hospitalization, neurodivergence, grief, and the death of a parent. Please look after yourself as you listen. Pause if you need to, and come back whenever you're ready. Or it's totally fine to skip this episode. If any of the topics raised today resonate or you need support, you can reach out to the Samaritans on 116 123 or text SHOUT to 85258. Remember, you're not alone and help is out there. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Now We're Really Talking, the podcast where we dive really deep into mental health stories. And today I'm really excited to be joined by Lara Rodwell, who is done so many incredible things and has so many different perspectives on mental health. I'm really excited to chat. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. It's good to be here. I'm excited too.
I guess the first question about, your childhood and you're a twin and that's had quite a big impact growing up. Can you just explain, first of all, for those who don't know what it's like being a twin, because I think it is a really unique thing that you don't know unless you are one.
Yeah.
But explain how that is and then how that's impacted your life.
Yeah, it's the question I've probably been asked a million times, like, what's it like being an identical twin? And every time I answer, like, I don't know any different, but that's not a very interesting answer. So yeah, being a twin, it's now at age 27, it's amazing, but growing up, it was very, very difficult from like kind of between the ages of like 13, I'd say, till like 21. So in that age where you're really kind of like figuring out who you are and your own personality. Before the age of 13 or so, it was kind of just a really good thing because you always had like a ready-made best friend. And I was always quite shy and sensitive at school, and actually tangent, but I was actually undiagnosed autistic ADHD. So I really struggled socially, and having an identical twin was really, really helpful. But my identical twin actually got really ill at the age of 13. So she got diagnosed with anorexia nervosa, and she actually got taken out of school for the best part of a decade. She was in and out of psychiatric units across the country. And from that point, we actually became really distant. I really struggled to kind of empathize with what she was going through. But actually, as I got a bit older, towards like the age of 18 or so, I began learning about mental health and specifically eating disorders. And now I can kind of look back and be so kind of compassionate towards what she was going through.
I think it's really difficult, isn't it, growing up when you're 13? It's hard to kind of have that compassion and when you're so young and discovering yourself anyway. And was that the first time you came across mental health and mental health challenges through your twin?
Yeah, I don't remember growing up anyone ever really speaking or like me learning about mental health. I didn't really know what it was, which was probably why when my sister got ill and diagnosed and I could just see all of her behaviours, which seemed to be so like disruptive to my family, I think I responded with anger because I didn't know any different. I'd always just been taught to be like polite and kind of accommodating growing up, and anything out of that is kind of like frowned upon. So I didn't have any idea like about mental health, which is why I'm so passionate about young people today, like learning about it from an early age, and especially like emotional regulation and stuff. I was never taught. I was always called like too sensitive as a child, but I was never taught how to manage that sensitivity.
And you mentioned earlier about being undiagnosed autistic and ADHD. How do you think that impacted A, the way you reacted to mental health, and B, did it lead into mental health challenges?
Yeah, so for a bit of context, I was in a therapy session about 2 years ago, and I was working through a lot of shame that I felt from this time with my sister growing up. Also, my dad died when I was 22, so I was working through a lot of that kind of stuff. One of the things I was struggling with, within which I thought was just my personality, was that I really struggled to let go of grudges, because I've now I know I have such a strong sense of justice, which is why I'm so passionate about the work in mental health and diversity that I do. But because I have this strong sense of justice, I struggle to, if I feel like someone's done something wrong to me or someone close to me or something I care about, then I really struggle to let it go. And that really conflicts with I guess my belief system. I'm quite spiritual. I'm a yoga teacher. I meditate every day. I practice mindfulness, like strongly believe in like loving kindness, like compassion. And this inability to let things go was really like affecting my mental health, my self-esteem, because I thought there was something wrong with me. I thought I was a bad person, which was when my therapist flagged to me that this and a number of other things I'd been working through kind of like represented autistic traits, especially in high masking women. So that was, for context, it was quite recently that I even figured out that I might be autistic. And then during that 2-year period, I experienced a lot of invalidation from people closest to me, saying things like, you know, you're the least autistic person ever, you love having a deep chat, you're a people person, you're so good with people, blah, 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 which was really hard. So now I know that I'm autistic. Looking back at my childhood, it makes sense as to why I struggled so much, especially socially. And I look back and I wish there was someone who could give that child like a hug and say, it's okay, like your brain just works a little bit differently. You're not oversensitive. You just feel things really deeply. And actually that is a gift, and that gift will help so many other people. But instead, I just internalized a lot of shame. So that's kind of what's affected me the most in adulthood, and my mental health in adult life and relationships and stuff, is this kind of sense of shame that's built up since my childhood from kind of external comments like me being too sensitive, me feeling misunderstood, not feeling like I fit in, which, yeah, I think with awareness of neurodivergence and mental health in general could have been prevented, really.
Yeah, I think shame is such a heavy feeling, and something that I struggled with a lot, especially when you have struggled and you look back and think, why was I like that? And you can only really get through that once you have a reason, and like you getting a diagnosis. When I was diagnosed with OCD, you can look back and actually understand why you were how you were. And how was that? What was the initial feeling? 'Cause you said it was recent when you got the diagnosis. Was it relief, or did you look back with frustration and anger at the fact that, you know, you could have been picked up earlier, and that would have explained and helped you earlier in your life?
Yeah. I think initially my reaction was relief, but it was also it was anger towards people who invalidated me. And I also got misdiagnosed. So I was actually not initially diagnosed as autistic. I was told I had social anxiety and emotional dysregulation issues. So until I went private, I wasn't actually validated. So I had to go through a lot of kind of obstacles in terms of reaffirming what I knew to myself. I'm so intuitive. I knew it to be true for myself, but I also needed that external validation from a specialist. I believe self-diagnosis is so valid. So I think when it was finally validated, I felt relief, but I also felt grief for that, younger version of myself who could have been supported a lot more and who kind of hid away and wanted to be invisible and blend into the background. And I wish like she had like a mentor to be like, just like embrace who you are. I was speaking on another podcast a few months ago, and that question you're asked when you're younger, it's like, what if you could be any animal, what could you be? My answer growing up was always a chameleon. So I always wanted like that. That was the first thing that always came to my head. Like I always just wanted to blend into the background. And now I realize that's what I did. Like my whole teenage years, 20s, like I masked to blend in. And now because it's so recent, I'm learning what life looks like, not masking and asking for what I need, which is very empowering.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such an interesting question around the animal, because at the time, probably when you're younger, it was just a throwaway question. But now when you look back, it's so interesting. And how do you think your gender affected the way you were seen? You said you were invalidated. Do you think being a woman impacted that?
Yeah, obviously I don't know what it's like being a man, but I do think as women, we're conditioned to kind of perform a lot more socially. So I learned from a very young age, to do the facial cues, to always smile, to always say please and thank you, to be really polite. And I guess I was conditioned to believe that if I did all of those things, then I would be like a good girl and I would be like a good student. And my aim, I guess, throughout school and in general was to just be like liked. So I learned that. I learned the tricks in order to be liked and like approved of. And I think as a woman socially, maybe it's a bit less of a norm to kind of step outside of that. Fortunately, I think it's less of the case now, and like generations previously, they probably struggled a lot more. But yeah, as a woman, I think it is hard to step outside of the box and like do things differently. Also, a big thing about being women is that I hate small talk. So I actually prefer being around like males a lot of the time, because one of the things I really struggle with my autism is I can't do small talk. So like if I'm in a group of girls and they're talking about like nails or their hair or makeup or something that I don't deem as important or meaningful, I really, really, really struggle. So that always affected me in like friendships growing up, because I couldn't hide it. I was just like so bored. But it works in my career because I love a deep chat. So
Yeah, that is that's fascinating around the small talk. And yeah, I try and avoid it where possible, but I think it's just something that you're kind of expected to do, aren't you? And how did you find school as somebody who kind of struggled socially?
yeah, so looking back, how I managed at school was basically to throw myself into academics. So I actually am not very naturally academic. When I was at primary school, I got like really bad, like the teachers were concerned about my like abilities. But then when it got to secondary school, I basically learned that if I just like worked really, really hard and did every single past paper, revised all the time, like went above and beyond, then I could like be successful, I guess. And that ended up in me like getting straight A stars, like went from being like the bottom of the class to like the top, but just because I just taught myself to be academic. And in doing so, I was able to mask the fact that I really struggled socially. So I would spend like the lunch times at school, like in the library, intentionally avoiding like being around people. Because my sister was in hospital, I could use the excuse that I was visiting her in hospital instead of like going to do social things after school, and just use the excuse of like, I've got to revise, I've got to get good grades, basically, to avoid social interaction. Basically, socializing at school was always like the bottom of my list, and it was something that like I would do if I had to do it, but it would not be fun at all.
Yeah, it's so funny because I really resonate with that. And I'd say like during my sixth form, I became a computer room hobbit, just always in the computer room studying. I didn't have many friends, so it was like an escape for me as well. But the kind of final question, I think, on this point, when you got your diagnosis, I saw when you announced it on LinkedIn, you said it was one of the harder posts. It was hard to open up. Why do you think that was the case?
I think just because of the invalidation that I'd experienced before, like from people around me, I felt like it was kind of like how I presented to the world, and now like such a vulnerable thing. Like it was like finally me like claiming who I actually am, whereas I feel like everything before that was kind of still me giving into the mask, almost like, you know, giving my thoughts, opinions. Like I'm a journalist, so like writing and stuff, giving my opinions, but like still behind this mask. So when I was diagnosed with autism, it's almost like shit, like I can't hide behind that mask anymore. Like I can't hide who I really am. And I think when you're first diagnosed, that is kind of scary because it is a shift in your identity, and it makes you feel quite vulnerable and exposed, I guess. It's just quite an exposing thing to suddenly come out and be like, I'm autistic. Like hands up in the air, like I've been masking my whole life, I'm autistic. Give me a break. Yeah. I think actually though, what's more scary is sharing, like starting conversations within like my family and like immediate circle, because I think even on like LinkedIn, there's lots of people who do actually understand. Whereas in my case, in my immediate family, you know, probably most of my family are autistic ADHD, but they've never got a diagnosis. So it's not like a welcomed conversation. And I almost feel like I have to tread on eggshells around it. And that's quite scary.
Yeah. I think looking back, I probably find it easier on LinkedIn than people in real life to
Mm,
open up, because you do kind of find that all my connections on LinkedIn are around a similar field to me. So they
yeah.
are more, they're going to relate to it more and understand more. Yeah, that's so interesting. And you mentioned earlier, around grief and, your dad passing away, I think, in 2020,
Mm.
which has kind of led to a different kind of journey, and you've done some, incredible things since then. Can you just take us back to 2020 and how that chapter really started?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was actually just graduated with a fine art degree, and me and my twin sister decided to go traveling. She just got out of hospital, and it was like an incentive for her to get better. So we wanted to go traveling, and we wanted to do our yoga teacher training in India. So we set off for 6 months. But then, long story short, we got a phone call from our dad in the beginning of 2020, and he was like, I've just received a terminal prognosis. I've got 6 months to live. So me and my sister got on the first flight back to the UK, and basically it was really weird because around that time, obviously the UK went into lockdown and it was the pandemic. So my dad got this news at the same time. So it meant all of my family were back home. We couldn't go anywhere. And for the next 6 months or so, as his health was deteriorating, we were just kind of together as a family. And actually, it was the first time I had experienced any kind of grief or loss, because I still have all four grandparents. The closest thing to me that had ever died before my dad was my pet tortoise. I didn't know what I was expected to like feel. But yeah, that actually led to quite an interesting project, which I can share about if you're interested in.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so my way of communicating best has always been through writing. I love writing. And I will find it hard to like express how I feel sometimes verbally, especially to people closest to me. It's probably like because of fear of rejection and stuff like that. Anyway, when my dad was ill, I started this notebook with him where I could basically like write letters and express myself through words to my dad, like express my gratitude for him, just like share memories and stuff and just like talk, but through writing. So we ended up having this notebook that we kept in the cabin that he built at the bottom of the garden. And we like wrote letters to each other. We both loved poetry, so we would write like funny little poems to each other. He would like do doodles. I wrote things like I wrote list headings, so like your 5 favorite memories, your 5 favorite places in the world, your 10 favorite songs, and he filled it all in. And actually, when going back when he first told me about his 6 months to live, the first thing that I thought of when he told me was like, oh my God, you're not going to be at my wedding one day. Like, you're not going to see me get married. I'd never even had a boyfriend at this point. So this was all in my head. 6 months later, in his will, he left me my wedding speech for my like hypothetical wedding. And then when he died, I kind of had this notebook, and it was like the most like magical keepsake of memories that I had with my dad. So I was struggling to work after he died, etc. And I basically had this idea, which I now know is like very ADHD. I couldn't sleep. So like woke up at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night with this like idea to basically turn this journal that I had with my dad into a book. So I ended up self-publishing a guided grief journal called From Prognosis to Peace. And it was basically inspired by this notebook that I kept with my dad. And it's for young people who are also going through that like anticipatory grief, like before your loved one has died, but also like dealing with it afterwards. So yeah, grief and like 2020 was like a blur, but it's hard to communicate this in a way that like I want to, but I wouldn't be where I am now if it wasn't for that. Like, I wouldn't have done my journalism masters. I wouldn't have written that book. I wouldn't have done all of the volunteering and speaking and writing and talking on radios and blah, blah, blah that I have done. And I wouldn't be like a mental health advocate. I wouldn't have realised all of these things about myself. And I think, yeah, that was kind of a gift in grief. And although it's really, really hard, like my dad was like my best friend, it's almost like you can't compare what that grief has given me. And it's like he wouldn't have wanted that either. So yeah, there was so many silver linings in the grief that I would never have expected. I just expected my life to be over when my dad died.
Yeah. It's incredible. I think I have a lot of conversations, and you probably do too, around when people talk about when they've been through really tough times with their mental health, that it's not a feeling that you're glad that it happened, but it led to, and it's very, like you say, it's very hard to put into words because you don't want to say that you're glad it's happened because you're not, but actually what's come out of it is like incredible. And had you, growing up, had death and grief been something that was on your mind?
Not really, to be honest. I think I was very naive growing up. And because I'd like, as I said, like I hadn't experienced death or loss before, I don't think I'd really thought about it. The only time I had thought about it was when my sister was ill, and she got to a point a few times where she, like the doctor said, like if she doesn't like eat, basically she could die. So that was the only time I thought, oh my God, like someone close to me like could die. I had no idea growing up. It wasn't really talked about at all. But I'm very grateful for the perspective that my dad had when he got ill, because he was very kind of stoic, and he was obviously scared, but he was very much like, these are the cards that I've been dealt. There are people who haven't had as good a life that I've had and the family that I have, and also have these 6 months to spend with you guys that I have. And if this is the way it's going to go, this is the way it's going to go. So I'm grateful. I don't think I would have responded to the loss as I have if it wasn't for his perspective.
Yeah, it's an incredible perspective to have, because I know that I wouldn't be like that if it happened to me. And you've written the book, but other people who have go through similar things, kind of maybe a loved one has given 6 months, a year left to live, what advice would you give them to really make the most of that time?
Yeah. So my advice has always been to actually be selfish. It's weird because you think during that time you should be completely selfless and kind of give up everything to be with that person. But as my dad always said, it's you guys that I feel sorry for. You know, I'm actually going to not be suffering. He wasn't really religious, but he like believed he would, you know, go to a good place. And he was like, you guys are going to be left without a dad. Like my mum was left without a husband, and you've got to navigate your whole life without that. So I guess as weird as it is, my advice is to be a little bit selfish. And that's why I asked my dad for things like I said about the wedding and like him not being at my wedding. And I also would like voice record conversations we had. So we would sit in lockdown and have these like hours and hours and hours long conversations. And the interesting ones and even not so interesting ones, I would just record on my phone because I was like, well, I want to have memories of my dad's voice. I want to have memories of like conversations we had and stuff. And I think thinking in a way that's like, no, actually, I've got to think in terms of my future self, and me at 50 years old who lost her dad 30 years ago will want to listen to those voice notes, want to read through those lists of his favourite things. So actually having a bit of foresight in terms of what your future self might need, I think is really good. And I'm glad that I had that naturally.
Yeah. It's and considering that but you're 22, you've been thrown into this and you'd not really experienced grief or anything like this before. I think it's amazing that you managed to create all of those things in those 6 months and now are doing things and written a book to ensure that other people can learn those lessons that maybe they wouldn't have. And, you know, I guess 6 months goes quite fast and before it's too late, they can learn kind of what you did.
Yeah.
So another part of your work is around loneliness, which I think is so interesting. Did you start the work from those experiences growing up in school and
Yeah.
socially?
Yeah, my interest in loneliness came from, it was when I was doing my journalism masters and we had to choose a topic for like our final major project. So somehow I stumbled on quite a lot of research after the pandemic around the loneliness epidemic amongst young people in the UK. And I thought, this is weird. Like, I had never really thought about loneliness. Obviously, sometimes you're like, oh yeah, I feel a bit lonely, but I'd never really heard of it from a young person's perspective. So when it really kind of conflicted with the stats of like, the stats are saying that X percentage of young people are lonely, but you don't really hear, all that you see on like social media or in the news and stuff is like elderly people who are lonely, who are like sitting at home on their own. So that basically led me to like start a social media page and start sharing my research and looking for case studies to interview for my masters, and like also sharing my own personal experience. As I said, I'm an open book, so I've always naturally quite openly shared my personal experience to like break down stigma and taboo around mental health things. So that was kind of where the seed was planted. And then from my masters, it kind of carried on because I started working with like charities like the Marmalade Trust, who do Loneliness Awareness Week, and Together Co, which is a Brighton-based charity. And I was asked to talk at a panel at Parliament to like increase awareness of loneliness. So quite naturally, my kind of advocacy work around loneliness built up. And then it got to a point where I was like, well, I need to actually like address this. So I started hosting what I've called Sunday strolls and socials in London on the first Sunday of every month for young adults. And we do them in like different parks around London. And it started off as like 6 people turning up, and now like 35 turn up every month, which is really cool. But now I'm kind of at the point where like the demand is strong and I'm just one person. So there's so much I want to do. And I've learned and talked to so many young people who are experiencing these feelings of loneliness and just crave this sense of belonging that, especially in big cities like London, is just not really very accessible. So my intention is to create like very low pressure, neurodivergent friendly spaces for young people to just connect and be themselves, like unmasked, complete belonging in like a safe space. So yeah, it's quite interesting, the journey of loneliness I've been through. But looking back, I think my interest has been sparked, obviously, by my personal experiences and feeling chronically lonely growing up as an undiagnosed autistic ADHD girl, as well as my experiences of like my sister being ill, the grief of losing my dad. I think loneliness is like the umbrella for all of those experiences.
I find loneliness so interesting, and you mentioned the Marmalade Trust. I think I read some statistics around it and the actual harm, and the fact that young people are more lonely than the older generation, which was really shocking to me. Do you think social media and mobile phones have increased loneliness amongst young people?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where it's like, it's not about what you do, it's how you do it. So I think social media can be used, if used in the right way, it can be great. And I did quite a lot of research for my master's around like active and passive use of social media. So if you're actively using social media to like message friends or find community like the Lonely Club on Instagram, or like actively trying to meet new people or using it as a bridge to connect from online to offline, then it's great. But if you're just using social media passively to like doom scroll through everyone's life, which leads you to comparing and maybe like feelings of FOMO and maybe even isolating yourself even further because you're like, I'm not as cool or interesting as these people, then I think that's negative. So I think it's very nuanced. And I wouldn't say social media is like 100% awful, and I wouldn't say it's 100% great, because I think there's a lot of like grey area.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. In society, we often label things as kind of as black and white, as either
Yeah.
really good or really bad, but actually it's what you do with it rather than the thing itself. And you mentioned the Lonely Club, and like listening to you now and looking at the things you've done, you've been through so much, and you've used that to do things that help other people. Was there a moment where you thought, for all of this, was there a moment that sparked you wanting to use your experience, or was it a gradual process into using your experiences to help other people?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. And I think I've thought about it a bit, like when I've kind of faced not backlash, but people, especially like my family and stuff, being like, oh, are you sure you want to talk about that? Like, what you put on the internet stays on the internet forever, etc. But to me, I feel like it's part of my purpose and like my duty on this earth to use my experience to connect with people and to make people feel less alone. So for me, the reason why I'm an open book is because I'm not unique in my experiences. I'm unique in maybe the combination of experiences, but actually everything that we go through as human beings, most likely someone else is going through it too. And if we don't talk about it, then how are we supposed to connect and relate to other people? So I don't think there was a specific point where I was like, I'm going to use my experiences to help other people. If I look back, it was probably when my dad died, because I gained a whole new perspective on life, in terms of like, I didn't really care as much what people thought of me, because when you go through something like that, it's just, you just think life is too short. Like, I'm just going to follow my gut and trust my intuition and just do what fulfills me and what brings me joy and purpose and peace. So I guess that's kind of when I was like, turned to writing the most and just really, really wanted to destigmatize and de-taboo certain topics. But it definitely wasn't like a sudden light bulb moment.
You've done so many different things outside of just the mental health work that kind of relate, and one of those things is journalism. Growing up, did you want to be a journalist, or did you think that journalism would be something you wanted to go into?
No, no, it wasn't at all. Looking back, it makes sense, but growing up, I was just very creative and arty. So I did a fine art degree to begin with, and that was a complete waste of time, to be honest. It actually made me think I actually preferred writing my dissertation for my fine art degree than actually doing the art itself. So I've always loved writing. Like I've always known that, but I never thought I wanted to be a journalist until I wrote my book, and I was like, wait, there's a way that I can write that like helps people, and that's like past just like writing a blog. So yeah, no, looking back it makes sense because I love writing, but it was never like something that was on the forefront of my mind at all.
And in your journalism, you integrate your own personal experience a lot into it. Why do you think that's important for journalists to do?
Yeah, I think first person journalism is really like important. And I think sometimes it's looked down upon as like not proper journalism. I actually did a journalism master's that specialised in arts and lifestyle journalism. So not like hard news, but more soft journalism, which links with my passion for mental health and everything. And I think it's just I really believe in the power of storytelling to like make social impact. So for me, if I read a story about someone going through a similar experience that I have through any stage of my life. I remember when I was growing up, I'd always go on like those teen websites where you'd get like advice, or there'd be someone who's going through the same thing. And I always latched on to those as like helping me feel less alone. So I think as I've kind of got older, I've wanted to provide that for other people. And that's come from the value that I've got from people providing that for me and being so kind of openly vulnerable and honest about their experience. Because I think actually as humans, we're so interested in each other. And I think we naturally connect to vulnerability as humans. And I've had the deepest, most meaningful connections when people have just been honest and frank about their experiences. So yeah, that's why I think journalism, like first person journalism, is so important.
That's one of the reasons I wanted to do the podcast, because I've learned so much from just talking to other people about their experiences, more than reading off an official like, NHS website, and hearing other people's lives and how what they've experienced really has helped me learn about myself. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about with first person journalism and kind of latching onto other people's experiences. Yeah. And another thing you mentioned is around yoga and meditation and spirituality. I'm really interested in the cross section between mental health and yoga and meditation. It's something that my counsellor is always keen for me to do, and perhaps I don't do it as much as I should. How do you think it helps your mental health?
Yeah, so yoga was something that I started at the age of 14, so very, very young. And looking back, it makes a lot of sense because I was a very anxious child. Like I had a very busy brain, was constantly overthinking everything, and I needed an escape. And yoga is such like a kind of insular activity. I'm not competitive at all, so I was never into like team sports or winning anything, but it was just a way for me to come back to myself. So I started it at 14, but more like for the physical practice, I guess. And then as I got older, I think meditation, mindfulness, spirituality is one of those things that you can't force upon somebody until they're ready. So I remember my mum tried to get me to meditate when I was about 16 because I was struggling a lot with my mental health. And I remember her giving me a book by Eckhart Tolle called The Power of Now. And I remember I read one page and I was like, this is trash. Like, I hate this. Like, this is so boring. And then, so I carried on just with my yoga practice. And then when I was at university, so I was 18, I remember I was living in this studio flat by myself, and I think I came across a video by Eckhart Tolle, the same guy, And I remember watching it and I was like, oh my God, it just suddenly hit me. He was talking about like the present moment and being like, you can't control the past or the future, you can just control the now. And I still had the book that my mum gave me, The Power of Now. And I remember picking it up and just like digesting all of it. Like I just read the whole thing and suddenly it just all made sense. And it just like suddenly I just felt like quite spiritual, like I just got it. So yeah, I can't see my life without the beliefs that I have. I don't see how I would kind of get through the grief of my dad, some of the hardships, adversities that I've been through, if it wasn't for like my belief in the universe. Like I believe, like I think I just always think of the bigger picture of like the universe knows, and I'm on like a certain path, I'm on a certain journey, and that is life. And if I didn't have that like faith, I guess, then I think life would be quite like meaningless for me.
Yeah, it's something that I often think about because I'm not religious, and it helps me with the OCD. I have guilt and think back like, why did this happen? Why did I do that? Why like obsess about things in the past? But if I can think about that, that what has happened has led me to where I am today, and what happens today will lead me to where I am next week. I think that's something that's really helped me. I don't think I describe myself as spiritual, but maybe in that way I am,
Mm.
in terms of being able to think like that and think of a bigger picture and think that there's something going on. And yeah, it's really interesting to have that kind of other element to have counselling and medication, but to have that other element that, counselling can't really offer
Mm.
is something that I, I'd like to do more of. And kind of finishing off, you mentioned earlier around what you want to do around the Lonely Club, but what are some of the other plans? What would you like to do moving forwards? Have you got anything else in the work?
Yeah. So my plans for 2026 for the Lonely Club is basically to create, I've got a small pot of funding, and I want to create a weekly drop-in hub for young people who don't feel like they fit into traditional social settings to come on a Sunday afternoon, and they can just sit and read their book if they want, or there'll be like optional activities, optional walks, basically just a space where young people can connect. So that's the initial plans of that. But leading on from that, I really want to work in schools. So I want to go into schools and do workshops on like loneliness. I want to speak to like the coordinators of like PSHCE and really incorporate loneliness and talking about loneliness and the importance of social health and belonging and connection. I want that to be part of the curriculum. So I guess I kind of want to be the voice of that for young people and really like allow them to feel seen and heard going into schools and just raising awareness, I think, of loneliness, which I don't think is talked about enough amongst young people. So I really want to destigmatize it and just start conversations like this around it, really.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think there's still so much stigma around loneliness, and especially now when you think that you're connected. I could speak to 100 different people right now on my phone, but none of them are that proper connection. And I think that, if young people and children are taught in schools around it, then it immediately decreases that stigma, which is so important. And I'm so excited to see what happens in 2026. I think it's so necessary. And the final question that I ask everybody at the end: if you could give yourself advice, so 10 years ago, 15 years ago, what would you tell your younger self?
I would tell my younger self that it's okay to use my voice. So I always felt really insecure about like speaking up about my thoughts, opinions, insights. I always felt like I had something to say, but there was something holding me back. So I would say that my voice is important, my experience, my perspective is important, and actually by sharing it, you're doing not only yourself a service, but you're doing others a service as well. And you're making other people feel less alone and more understood and more seen. So yeah, it would be to use my voice.
I really love that. I think that's great advice, and advice for anybody now out there. who feels the same way? And you have accounts to shout out?
Yeah, so, well, the main one being The Lonely Club on Instagram. So it's @_The Lonely Club. And that's where you can kind of join the WhatsApp group, learn about the events, meetups we do, and also get updates about what's coming in 2026.
Amazing. And thank you so much, Lara, for joining me for this conversation. It's so important, and I'm so grateful for you being so open and sharing so much of what you've been through and what you're doing now. It's incredible. I really appreciate that.
I love these conversations. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh no, it was incredible, and thank you everybody for listening. I really appreciate it, and there'll be resources and links to the Lonely Club in the description. I really appreciate it, and I'll catch you in the next one. Once again, thank you so much for listening to Now We're Really Talking. If anything in this episode has brought up difficult feelings for you, please reach out for support. You don't have to go through it alone. If you're in the UK, you can contact Samaritans on 116 123, or contact Shout by texting 85258, or visit mind.org.uk for mental health support. If you're listening from outside the UK, you can find international helplines at findahelpline.com. Remember, there's always help out there, and talking about it is a strength, not a weakness.